Surviving D-Day did not mean a soldier had survived Normandy. The beach was only the first door, and behind it waited hedgerows that hid machine guns, roads too narrow for rescue, villages turned into traps, and quiet fields where death could stand only a few steps away. Men who thought the worst was behind them soon learned that victory on land had to be paid for slowly, through mud, sleepless nights, wounded friends, and homes broken in the name of liberation. Tonight, we follow the soldiers beyond the beach, into the part of Normandy where the real killing began. If the beach had not killed him, a soldier could believe that the worst part of Normandy was already behind him. He had crossed the wet sand, past broken wire, and reached ground that no longer moved with the sea. His uniform hung heavy with water, his boots were packed with grit, his rifle felt rough with sand under his fingers. His ears still rang from guns, engines, shouting and explosions pressed together inside his head. The thought in his mind was simple and completely understandable. He was still alive. That thought had a reason. A man who had just survived the beach had survived the part everyone feared before landing. He had seen the obstacles. He had seen men fall before they could stand. He had felt the open space offer no mercy. So when he reached ground beyond the fire, he might look down at his wet sleeves, touched his weapon, feel his chest still rising, and think that the terrible gate had closed behind him. It was not happiness. It was the body taking one small breath after being hunted in the open. Then Normandy showed him what waited beyond the sand. There was no clean road into France, no wide path where the army could pour inland. Behind the beach were small fields, hedgerows, sunken lanes, stone farmhouses, muddy tracks, burned villages that looked quiet, only because they had not fired yet. The land narrowed around him. It hid corners. It folded danger into green walls and farm roads. The beach had been frightening because it exposed him to everything at once. The country behind it was frightening because it let danger stay close without being seen. The first shock was not that the Germans were still there. He knew the war had not ended on the sand. The shock was that the shape of fear changed so quickly. On the beach, the enemy seemed to be ahead. Beyond smoke, dunes, wire and guns, inland, the front broke into pieces. It could be behind a hedge. It could be in an upstairs window. It could be around the bend of a lane. It could lie in a ditch that looked empty until the first burst of fire cut the air. Normandy did not always warn a man. It let him walk closer before it spoke. It is almost generous to say the landing was only the beginning, because Normandy seemed ready to congratulate every survivor by handing him a new place to die. The body understood this first. His legs were weak from running, crouching, crawling and stumbling through surf and sand. His shoulders ached from gear too heavy before the firing. His mouth was dry. His stomach might be empty, tight with fear or sick from smoke. Salt, sweat, dust and powder clung to his skin. He might have bruises he did not remember getting and unnoticed cuts. Survival had not made him whole. It had only left him available for the next demand. There was little power in that moment. He could not sit down and decide that enough had been asked of him. The orders kept moving. Roads had to be taken. Inland exits had to be cleared. Units had to link up. Supplies, tanks, medics, ammunition, prisoners, and more men pressed forward behind him. If the beachhead did not grow, it could become a trap. So he had to keep walking, even when every part of his body wanted to stop in the first ditch that seemed deep enough. This is a plain truth of invasion. Getting ashore is not the same as winning ground. A landing puts men on land, but the land still has to be entered, field by field, lane by lane, hedge by hedge. A map can show an arrow pointing inland, but a soldier does not walk through an arrow. He walks through mud, shell holes, trampled grass, broken carts, and farmyards where someone may be waiting. Plans can look smooth from far away, while the human body meets every yard one step at a time. Modern people can look at Normandy on a map and see progress in neat lines. But the soldier on the ground mostly saw the next hedge, the next ditch, and the next place where he might disappear. A sad scene could be small. A man might pause beside a low wall and look back toward the beach, where smoke hung over the shore. He might see another soldier sitting with his helmet tilted forward, not badly wounded, only too tired to move. Someone might be trying to clean sand from a rifle with shaking hands. Nearby, a stretcher team might pass without speaking, because too many bodies had passed already. Then the order would come, and the men who could stand would stand. What stays with me most is the thought that some men probably believed for a few minutes that the nightmare had loosened its grip just before the countryside closed around them. For the man inland, it shrank into simple questions. Could he keep low? Could he hear the order? Could he see the next danger before it saw him? Could he trust the man beside him to watch one side while he watched the other? They did not remove the weight of wet clothing or the fear of a hedge that would not show what it held. It became a tired man trying to stay alive long enough to reach the next cover. He had survived one door, but the House of Normandy still had many locked rooms ahead. Famous days can hide the days that follow them. D-Day became a symbol because it was huge and easy to name. But Normandy after D-Day was not a clean road from landing to victory. It was a slow passage that broke armies into small groups, small fears and small deaths. The beach was a doorway, but the rooms behind it were made of hedgerows, stone, villages, burned vehicles and blind corners. A man could survive the sea, the surf, and the first wall of fire, then learn the real killing had moved inland. The soldier left the beach with wet clothes, ringing ears, and the fragile belief that he had already passed through the worst of Normandy. The land ahead replaced open terror with hidden danger, where every field, hedge and lane could turn against him without warning. What waited beyond the first fields was not freedom moving smoothly into France, but a green maze where survival could vanish a few steps from safety. Normandy did not open in front of the soldier like a wide battlefield. It closed around him. After the beach, he entered a country that looked almost too ordinary for the amount of death waiting inside it. There were fields, lanes, ditches, and thick green hedges rising from banks of earth. A man could see leaves, broken branches, and mud on the road. Nothing about it looked like the clean lines on a military map. It looked like farmland, and that was part of the problem. The bocage had been made for farms, not for armies. Its hedgerows marked property, held soil, blocked animals, and divided the land into small spaces that local people understood by habit. But once soldiers entered it, those hedgerows became walls. They were thick, high, tangled, and rooted into raised earth. A man could stand on one side and have almost no idea what waited on the other. A field might be only a few dozen yards across, but reaching the far hedge could feel like crossing an exposed battlefield. Then the danger turned personal. A unit could be close to German soldiers and still see nothing. The men might crouch in wet grass, listening to breathing, distant engines, and gear shifting. The hedge ahead might look still, the lane might seem empty. Then a gun would begin, and the quiet field would become too small to hide in. The frightening thing was not distance, it was nearness without sight. Normandy let men stand beside danger before they understood it was there. It is almost impressive how a peaceful farm boundary could become a military nightmare. As if the countryside had quietly decided to charge rent in blood for every field crossed. The body reacted before any clear thought formed. Men dropped into mud, pressed their chests against wet ground, and tried to make themselves flatter than the earth allowed. Dirt jumped beside their hands. A helmet might ring from a branch hit nearby. A man's mouth went dry while his face lay close to roots, grass, and old farm soil. His knees hurt from sudden falls. His breathing became shallow because lifting the head even a little could feel like asking to be chosen. There was no easy way to solve it. A soldier could not shoot clearly at what he could not see. He could not always know whether the fire came from the hedge, the corner of a field, a gap in the bank, or a hidden position beyond the next lane. Officers had maps, but maps did not show which bush held a gun, which opening was covered, or where a mine had been placed. The men had to learn by looking, crawling, waiting, and sometimes by seeing which man was hit first. The lesson Normandy gave was simple and heavy. Terrain can be as important as weapons. A machine gun or an anti-tank weapon becomes more dangerous when the land helps hide it. The Germans did not need every field to be a fortress. They needed enough covered positions, narrow lanes, hedges, and patience to slow the advance. The Allied soldier learned that progress was not only a matter of courage, it depended on sight, cover, coordination, and finding danger before it found him. Modern people are used to roads, signs, satellite views, and clear directions, but a soldier in the bocage could be lost inside a few small fields, while still being only a short walk from where he started. One sad scene could happen without anything dramatic at first. A squad reached a hedge and stopped. One man peered through leaves while another knelt near a gap in the bank. Someone tried to guess whether the next field sloped upward. A farmhouse roof showed over trees, quiet and harmless. Then fire came from somewhere no one had marked. The man nearest the gap fell backward into the grass. The others froze because helping him meant exposing themselves to the same unseen line. What stays with most is how small the battlefield could become, and how completely that smallness could trap a man. The bocage changed the social shape of war too. Large formations broke into smaller groups. A company could lose contact with nearby men because one hedge, one bend, or one sunken road blocked sight and sound. Tanks needed infantry close by, but infantry feared the fire that tanks attracted. Engineers had to clear mines under pressure. Medics had to find men in fields that looked alike. Orders travelled slowly. A soldier might know the general plan, but his real world was the hedge ahead. The larger truth was that Normandy after D-Day did not become easier because the landing had succeeded. The beach had been wide, violent, and unforgettable. The bocage was slower, closer, and more confusing. It turned farmland into a maze and made courage feel blind. A man could advance 20 yards, stop, listen, crawl, fire at leaves, drag a friend back, and still not know whether he had moved forward or merely survived another corner. Normandy was not a broad open front, waiting for brave men to march across it. It was a maze of hedges, banks, lanes, and hidden guns that made every field feel separate from the last. Beyond those hedges, the soldier would learn that even one small quiet field could swallow a whole group before anyone fully understood where the killing had begun. A new soldier coming off the beach could look at a Normandy field and almost feel insulted by how harmless it seemed. It was not as wide as the sand. It was not covered with steel obstacles. It did not have the same open, brutal look of a landing zone under fire. It was low, green, and boxed in by hedges, with grass pressed by tracks, mud near the edges, and maybe a few trees leaning over the bank. To eyes that had just seen the beach, a small field could look like a pause in the war. That was the ordinary reason men trusted it too quickly. A field was something the mind understood from a peaceful life. Fields grew crops. Fields held cattle. Fields sat behind farmhouses and village roads. Even in wartime, they carried the shape of ordinary work. A soldier might see the far hedge and think of it as a short distance. He might think that if he moved fast, stayed low, and followed the man ahead, he could cross it in a few seconds. After the chaos of D-Day, a small green space might look manageable. Then the field began to show what it really was. The far hedge was not only a boundary, it was a wall with leaves. The corner of a garden was not only a corner, it was a place where a gun could wait. A gap in the bank was not only an entrance, it was a narrow point already watched by someone who had arrived first. The soldier had to step into the open without knowing whether the other side held a machine gun, a rifleman, a mortar observer, or nothing at all. The worst part was that nothing at all and death could look the same until the first shot came. It is almost cruel how a field small enough for a farmer to cross before breakfast could become large enough to swallow a platoon. The body did not need a lecture to understand that danger. A man moving across the grass felt his shoulders tighten before any bullet came. His neck pulled low, his fingers pressed harder around the rifle. His mouth dried out. His feet wanted speed, but his mind wanted him to stop, look, listen, and somehow know what could not be known. When firing began, the body became smaller by instinct. Men dropped hard, hit elbows and knees, pushed faces into wet earth, and tried to become part of the field instead of targets inside it. Helplessness came from not knowing where to place fear. On a beach, the danger had been terrible, but it had a direction. In a Normandy field, fear spread into every edge. The left hedge might be safe, or it might hold the gun. The right corner might be empty, or it might be waiting for men to run toward cover. The far bank might hide Germans, or only roots and shadow. A man could not protect himself from every side at once. He had to choose where to look, and that meant leaving something unseen. The lesson was simple, and men learned it in the worst possible way. Small ground is not safe ground. A short distance can still be fatal when the enemy controls the exits, the corners, and the places where a man must pass. The size of a battlefield does not decide how frightening it is. What matters is what can see Yuzu, what you cannot see, and how little time you have once the first weapon opens. Normandy taught that a field could be measured not in yards, but in chances to be hit. Modern life teaches people to think of danger as something large and obvious, but in the bocage, danger could be quiet, green, and close enough to touch. One sad scene could be painfully small. A squad entered a field behind a hedge, one man after another, each crouched under the weight of his pack. The grass was damp against their legs. A few broken branches lay near the bank. Someone pointed toward the far side, where the next opening seemed to lead into another lane. For a moment, the men might have believed they were only passing through. Then the first burst came from an angle they had not chosen to watch. The front man folded into the grass. Another tried to move toward him and stopped when dirt jumped near his hands. The rest lay flat, breathing hard, close enough to see him, but not free enough to reach him. What stays with me most is not only that a man could die in such a small place, but that his friends might be trapped close enough to see him and still unable to help. This was how Normandy broke down the idea of a clean advance. A platoon was not always destroyed by one grand attack. It could be cut, pinned, confused, and thinned inside ordinary pieces of farmland. One man fell at the gap, another was hit trying to crawl back. A third disappeared near the hedge. The rest waited for smoke, artillery, a tank, an order, or simply a chance to move without being chosen by the next burst. What looked on a map like a line moving inland was, on the ground, a group of tired men trapped in grass, dirt, and hesitation. The larger truth is that after D-Day, many soldiers did not view war as one dramatic moment. They met it as repeated small crossings, field after field, hedge after hedge, opening after opening. Each one asked the same question in a slightly different way. Would this be the place where the hidden gun waited? Would this be the place where the next man fell? Would this be the place where a soldier learned that surviving the beach had only brought him into a closer kind of fear? The small fields of Normandy looked calmer than the beach, but they carried a quieter and more confusing danger. A new soldier had to learn that every hedge, corner, and narrow opening could turn a few steps of farmland into a killing place. Past those fields waited an even harder truth, because in Normandy, the deadliest enemy was often the one a man could not see at all. The most frightening thing in Normandy was not always a German soldier standing in front of a man. It was often the empty place where a German soldier might be. A hedge could look thick and still. A lane could bend quietly between banks of earth. An orchard could sit behind a farmhouse with low branches and broken grass underfoot. To a tired infantryman, all of it looked ordinary enough to enter, but not ordinary enough to trust. After the beach, he had to learn that danger did not need a face. That was the reason fear became so tiring here. A man could not relax simply because he saw no movement. The enemy did not have to step into the open or make himself clear. He could wait behind leaves, inside a stone wall, beyond a gate, or beside a road already watched by a machine gun. The soldier's eyes worked constantly, but the land gave him very little back. He looked for a helmet, a muzzle, a shape, a hand, a shadow, anything that might turn fear into something visible. Most of the time he saw only green. Then the killing came from concealment. A hidden machine gun behind a hedgerow did not need to show itself to stop a whole squad. A few bursts could flatten men into the mud, break an advance, and turn a careful plan into shouting, crawling, and confusion. A mine under a dirt road did not need to warn anyone before it lifted a vehicle apart. A tripwire in a path did not look heroic or dramatic. It only waited for a boot. A mortar position behind an orchard did not need to be seen by the men it wounded. It only needed someone to know where to aim. It is almost unfair to call it a battlefield when so much of the battle was fought by things that stayed hidden until they had already done their work. The body paid for that hidden danger in small, constant ways. A soldier's shoulders stayed tight. His neck hurt from keeping low. His eyes burned from staring into leaves and dark windows. His fingers stiffened around his rifle because letting go felt careless. Every step carried a question. Was the road mined? Was the gap covered? Was the quiet hedge only a hedge? When a burst of fire came, the body dropped before the mind understood. Knees slammed into dirt. Elbows hit stones. Breath left the chest. Then came the sick little silence afterward, when men tried to learn who had been hit without lifting their heads too high. Helplessness in Normandy often came from being forced to guess. A soldier could be brave and still not know where to shoot. He could be trained and still not know which patch of leaves hid the gun. He could hear bullets cutting over him, but not see the man firing them. He could see a friend fall, but not see the exact place that had chosen him. That kind of fear was not loud all the time. Sometimes it was a long, quiet pressure behind the eyes, the feeling that the whole countryside was watching while he could not watch it back. The lesson was simple, but it was learned in a cruel place. War is not only about strength, numbers, or weapons. It is also about sight. The side that sees first often kills first. The side that is hidden can make the other side waste time, courage, ammunition, and men. Normandy gave cover to defenders and doubt to attackers. The hedges, banks, lanes, orchards, and villages did not fight by themselves, but they helped every weapon placed inside them become more dangerous. Modern people often think danger should announce itself clearly, but a soldier in Normandy had to fear a quiet lane the way we might fear a warning sign, because silence there could be part of the trap. A sad scene could begin with almost nothing. A patrol moved along a narrow track, boots pressing into damp soil, rifles angled toward both sides. One man glanced at an apple tree behind a wall. Another watched the bend ahead. A third looked down, careful not to step too close to the road edge. The place had the stillness of a farm after rain. Then the first explosion came from under the road, or the first gun opened from behind the hedge, and the stillness disappeared. A man who had been walking a second earlier was suddenly on the ground. The others scattered without knowing whether to crawl forward, crawl back, or stay still and wait for the next shot. What stays with me most is that the men were not always defeated by what they failed to do, but by what no human eye could reasonably catch in time. This made Normandy feel larger than its fields. The fear spread through every group, every road, every halt, and every attempt to move forward. Officers had to ask men to advance into places no one could fully read. Engineers had to search for mines while under threat from guns they could not see. Medics had to crawl toward wounded men while the same hidden weapon waited. Drivers had to take trucks down roads where one bare-eyed church could block everyone behind them. The whole army moved, but each man carried the private feeling that the land ahead knew more than he did. The larger truth was that Normandy was killed by hiding the moment of decision. A man could prepare for a visible attack. He could aim at a known enemy. He could brace himself when he saw danger coming. But in the bocage, the first clear sign often arrived as noise, blast, pain, or someone falling beside him. By then, the lesson had already been paid for. The countryside did not need to look monstrous. It only needed to keep its worst secrets long enough. Normandy after D-Day became terrifying because it made death difficult to see before it arrived. A hidden gun, a buried mine, a wire in a path, or a mortar behind trees could break men who had already survived the beach. The harder truth waiting ahead was that the Germans did not always need to win ground forever. They only needed to make every yard cost more than the living wanted to pay. The German soldier in Normandy did not always need to stop the Allied advance forever. Sometimes he only had to slow it down for another hour, another field, another road bend, another village edge. After D-Day, many German units had already lost the greater control they had once imagined. Allied ships were offshore. Allied aircraft were overhead. More men, vehicles, ammunition, and supplies were landing every day. The great invasion had not been thrown back into the sea, but that did not mean the land behind the beaches would be given up cleanly. That was the ordinary reason the fighting became so bitter. A defender does not always need to win the whole campaign to make the attacker suffer. He needs a hedge thick enough to hide behind, a stone house strong enough to fire from, a crossroads that everyone must pass, or an anti-tank gun placed where a road narrows. In Normandy, the Germans had all of these things. They could turn a small village into a delay. They could turn a field corner into a trap. They could turn a lane into a place where tanks, trucks, and infantry all lost their confidence at the same time. Then the Allied soldier learned the cruel price of progress. A field could be taken, but not freely. A hedge could be crossed, but not casually. A road could be opened, but only after someone checked for mines, someone fired at windows, someone crawled toward a bank, and someone stayed behind in the grass. The Germans did not need to hold every yard until the end of the war. They only needed to make every yard hurt enough that the next one felt heavier before anyone reached it. It is almost a dark kind of efficiency, losing ground slowly while making the other side pay for the privilege of standing on it. The body felt this kind of war as a daily wearing down. A man might start the morning already tired, already dirty, already sore from the day before. His boots were damp. His shoulders had grooves from straps. His hands were scraped from crawling, digging, and grabbing at earth. Then he had to move again toward another hedge, another farm, another lane that might hold the same danger in a slightly different form. There was no clean sense of finishing. One position fell and another appeared. One German gun was silenced and another waited farther on. Helplessness came from knowing that success did not always feel like success. A platoon could take a field and still be too exhausted to celebrate it. A tank could knock out one enemy position and then become trapped by the road itself. A squad could clear a farmhouse and then realize the next barn, the next wall, and the next orchard would ask the same price. The men were moving forward, but the forward movement was so small, so costly, and so soaked in fear that victory often felt like surviving until the next order. The lesson sat quietly inside the mud. Defensive war can be powerful even when it is losing. A retreating or pressured army can still shape the attacker's pain by choosing where to resist, where to hide, where to place mines, and where to force movement into narrow ground. Normandy made that lesson painfully clear. The Germans used the land not as scenery, but as a weapon. Hedgerows broke vision. Stone houses held bullets. Crossroads gathered targets. Anti-tank fire made every armoured push feel uncertain. Modern people often think losing ground means losing quickly, but in Normandy, an army could be pushed back and still leave exhaustion, Fear and bodies behind in almost every field. A sad scene could happen at the edge of a small village. Allied soldiers reached the first houses after hours of slow movement. The walls were chipped by fire. Smoke hung near a road where a vehicle had burned. A dead cow lay near a ditch. Someone signalled from behind a garden wall. Men moved forward, crouched, dirty and careful. Then fire came from a building that had looked empty. The men dropped again. A soldier who had crossed the beach days earlier pressed himself against a stone wall, breathing hard, while the village ahead seemed to shrink into windows, doors, and corners. What stays with me most is how many men must have realized that the enemy did not need to defeat them completely to ruin the day, the body, and sometimes the rest of a life. This was not only a contest between brave men on two sides. It was also a contest between an army trying to expand a beachhead and a defender trying to make that expansion miserable. The Germans were under pressure, short on freedom, and often hammered by Allied firepower, but they could still make the bocage work for them. The Allied soldier paid for that with nerves, sleep, blood, and the slow loss of any belief that a captured field meant peace. The war kept giving him proof that ground could be won and still feel cursed. The larger truth is that Normandy after D-Day was not a story of one side simply advancing and the other simply collapsing. It was a hard exchange between pressure and delay. Allied power grew behind the beaches, but German resistance turned the countryside into a grinding machine. Each delay bought time. Each mine slowed a road. Each hidden gun forced men down. Each village made the map look simple and the ground feel endless. The soldier learned that a campaign could move forward while the men inside it felt trapped in repetition. German resistance in Normandy did not have to hold every field forever to make the Allied advance bleed. It only had to turn hedges, villages, crossroads, stone houses, and anti-tank fire into prices paid step by step. Ahead, another burden waited when all those men, machines, supplies, prisoners, and wounded bodies tried to squeeze through the narrow roads behind the beach. Narrow roads behind the beach became crowded almost as soon as the landing turned into an advance. Everything that had crossed the sea now needed a way inland. Tanks had to move forward. Trucks had to bring fuel, food, ammunition, radios, stretchers, wire, tools, spare parts, and men. Guns had to be dragged into position. Prisoners had to be moved back. Wounded soldiers had to be carried out. Replacement troops had to be pushed in. The same small roads were asked to carry the whole weight of a modern army. That was the ordinary reason the rear did not feel this. A road was supposed to mean movement. It was supposed to mean direction, order, and a way through the countryside. But in Normandy, many roads were narrow, sunken, muddy, and pressed between hedgerows or banks of earth. A truck could barely pass another vehicle. A tank could make the lane feel smaller just by entering it. Men walking beside the road had to squeeze against hedges, ditches, walls, and burned wrecks. The road was useful, but it was also a trap with wheels inside it. Then the danger became clear. One burning vehicle could stop an entire line. One shell landing at a crossroads could scatter men, block supplies, and turn a planned movement into a frightened jam. A truck hit in the wrong place not only destroys itself, it trapped the vehicles behind it. It delayed ammunition. It delayed medics. It delayed tanks that might be needed at the front. It forced men to climb around wreckage while wondering whether the next shell had already been fired. Normandy did not have to kill only at the firing line. It could choke the army behind it. It is almost ridiculous how a great invasion with ships, aircraft, tanks, and thousands of men could be brought to a halt by one burning truck in a road too narrow to forgive it. The body felt this pressure in close and ugly ways. Drivers sat with hands tight on steering wheels, listening for engines ahead and shells above. Infantrymen walked beside vehicles, breathing exhaust, dust, smoke, and fear. A man's shoulders brushed against hedges. His boots slipped in churned mud. His stomach tightened when traffic stopped for no clear reason. Stopping was dangerous. Moving was dangerous too. A soldier could feel trapped even while the whole army was supposed to be advancing. There was little anyone could do once the road clogged. Men shouted for space, but there was no space to give. A tank could not simply turn around in a sunken lane. A truck could not move through a hedgerow. A stretcher team could not hurry when wheels, mud, wreckage, and frightened men filled the way. Engineers might have to clear mines or drag wrecks aside while shells continued to fall. Military order still existed, but the road could reduce it to waiting, sweating, and hoping the next explosion landed somewhere else. The lesson was plain. An army does not live only by courage at the front. It lives by roads, fuel, timing, and the ability to move men and supplies through bad ground. When those things fail, bravery becomes harder to use. A rifleman needs ammunition. A tank needs fuel. A wounded man needs a route back. A commander needs units to arrive where they are supposed to arrive. Normandy made every part of that difficult. The countryside not only resisted the soldiers with hidden guns, it resisted the whole machine trying to push through it. Modern people often imagine war as a front line, but in Normandy, the road behind the line could feel almost as tense as the field ahead, because every delay might decide who received help and who did not. A sad scene could sit at a crossroads. A truck burned near the bend, its load scattered into the mud. Men crouched beside a ditch while smoke rolled across the lane. A tank waited behind it, engine idling, too large to move past. A wounded man lay on a stretcher near the bank while two medics looked down the blocked road, knowing the aid station was not far in miles but suddenly very far in reality. Behind them, more vehicles gathered. Ahead of them, the front still needed everything that could not get through. What stays with me most is how helpless a man could feel in the rear, close to supplies, close to comrades, close to rescue, and still trapped by a road that had stopped breathing. This turned the area behind the beach into its own kind of battlefield. It was not always marked by charging men or clear enemy positions. Sometimes it was marked by jammed vehicles, broken axles, mud, smoke, shouting officers, exhausted drivers, prisoners waiting under guard, and wounded men listening to the delay that might cost them blood. The front line depended on this crowded space, and this crowded space was never fully safe. Artillery could reach it, aircraft could frighten it, mines could break it. Confusion could spread through it faster than orders could repair it. The larger truth is that Normandy, after D-Day, was not only a fight for fields and villages, it was a fight for movement. The Allies had power, but power had to pass through lanes, gaps, crossroads, and roads that were never built for such weight. The Germans knew this and fired at the places where movement gathered. The land itself made the problem worse. A modern army had arrived, but it had entered a countryside that forced metal, flesh, fuel, fear, and wounded bodies into the same narrow passages. The roads behind the beach carried tanks, trucks, guns, prisoners, supplies, replacement soldiers, and wounded men through distances too small for the burden placed on them. A single wreck, shell, mine, or blocked crossroads could make the rear feel as trapped as the front. Into that pressure came the replacement soldier, often arriving late, alone, and unwanted by men who had already seen too many new faces disappear. Replacement soldiers often arrived in Normandy after the unit had already been changed by loss. They did not walk into a fresh platoon with clean order, calm voices, and time to learn everyone's face. They came into a group that had already crossed beaches, hedges, lanes, shellfire, and small fields where men had disappeared too quickly. Some of the old names were gone. Some men were wounded, some were missing, some were still present, but their eyes had changed in a way no new man could understand at first. That was the ordinary reason the arrival felt so cold. A new soldier needed simple things. He needed to know who was in charge, who slept near him, where the safest ditch was, which road had been shelled, which hedge was watched, and which men could be trusted to explain things without wasting words. But Normandy did not always give him time. He might be handed to a platoon in the middle of movement, near a road, beside a field, or after a bad day when nobody had the strength to be kind. The unit needed his body before it had time to know his name. Then the danger turned private. The old men looked at him with tired caution, not because they hated him, but because they had seen new men arrive and vanish before anyone got used to them. A replacement might stand too high when others crouched. He might step into the wrong opening. He might ask too many questions at the wrong moment. He might not yet understand that a quiet hedge could be more dangerous than a loud one. The men who had survived could see these mistakes forming before the new man could feel them. It is almost cruel how an army could call a man a replacement, as if a living stranger could neatly fill the space left by someone who had bled into the grass. The body of a replacement carried fear in a different way. He might be less exhausted than the veterans, but that did not make him safer. His boots might be newer. His hands might not yet be scraped from crawling through hedgerows. His face might still hold the look of someone who believed training had prepared him, but his stomach tightened as soon as he felt the silence around the platoon. He could sense that nobody had the spare strength to comfort him. His body waited for instructions, while the land waited for mistakes. Helplessness came from entering a story already written in blood. The new man had not seen who had died yesterday, but he stood in the space they left. He did not know why a certain corner was avoided. He did not know why one veteran refused to use a certain gap in the hedge. He did not know whose pack had been moved aside that morning, or why nobody spoke about it. The platoon had memories he did not share, and those memories were not decoration. They were survival rules. The lesson was plain, and it had nothing noble in it. Experience in Normandy was often bought by someone else's wound, someone else's panic, or someone else's death. A replacement did not lack courage because he was new. He lacked the local knowledge that only a few days in the bocage could give. He had to learn where to crouch, when to freeze, when not to trust a road, and when silence meant trouble. The terrible part was that the first lesson might also be his last. Modern people often imagine joining a group as a matter of names and introductions, but in Normandy, a replacement could join a platoon by standing where a dead man had stood only hours before. A sad scene could begin beside a narrow lane. A truck stopped long enough to let several men climb down with rifles and packs. The road was muddy. A tank waited ahead. Smoke hung near a hedge where something had burned earlier. The replacements looked toward the men already there, hoping for a nod, a name, a sign that they had arrived somewhere stable. The veterans looked back with faces too tired to welcome anyone properly. One man shifted aside to make room in the line, but the space he opened did not feel empty by accident. What stays with me most is the loneliness of a man arriving too late to know the dead, but just in time to inherit their danger. This changed the unit from the inside. The platoon had to keep functioning even as its human memory was cut apart and patched with strangers. Men who had shared the beach were gone. Men who understood each other's movements were missing. New soldiers had to learn quickly, while old soldiers had to decide whether they still had the heart to explain. Some became protective. Some became distant. Some said very little because saying more meant caring more, and caring more made the next loss harder to survive. The larger truth is that Normandy did not only grind down bodies, it ground down belonging. A military unit is supposed to be more than a count of men and weapons. It is built from trust, habit, shared fear, and small knowledge passed from one person to another. But after D-Day, replacements often entered units that had been hollowed out. They were necessary, but their arrival also reminded everyone that someone had been removed. The army saw Suresh returning. The men on the ground saw another unfamiliar face placed near the same hidden dangers. Replacement soldiers in Normandy often stepped into platoons already thinned by death, wounds, exhaustion, and silence. They had to learn the land, the men, and the rules of survival while standing inside spaces left by those who had not made it. A few days could turn a new man old, because Normandy taught its lessons quickly, and often through the body of whoever failed to learn first. After D-Day, Normandy aged soldiers quickly. A man could arrive as a replacement with a clean idea of war still sitting somewhere in his mind, and after a few days in the bocage, that idea could be gone. His face might not change much at first. His uniform might still look newer than the others. His pack might still be arranged the way training had taught him, but the way he looked at a hedge, a lane, or a quiet garden would begin to change. He would stop seeing the countryside and start seeing possible death. That change happened for ordinary reasons. There was no long classroom for survival in Normandy. No one had time to gather the new men and calmly explain every danger. The lesson came while moving, crouching, waiting, and watching what happened to others. A soldier learned not to stand too high because someone else stood too high first. He learned not to step into a gap too quickly because someone else had done it and fallen. He learned that a still hedge might be watched because a man beside him had trusted one and never stood up again. A new man did not become old by understanding the war. He became old by losing the right to misunderstand it. The first mistake he saw could burn itself into him. A careless step, a lifted head, a pause in the wrong place, a hand reaching toward a gate, a body suddenly folding in the grass. Normandy taught through examples no one wanted to receive. The frightening thing was that the teacher was often another soldier's pain. It is almost a perfect system of cruelty, because the safest lessons were usually delivered through someone who no longer needed them. The body changed with each lesson. A new soldier began to carry himself lower. His neck bent before anyone reminded him. His knees touched the ground. His hands stopped relaxing around the rifle. His eyes searched the hedges without being told. Sleep became lighter. Hunger became less important than cover. Even silence felt different. At first, silence might have seemed like a break from battle. After a few days, silence could make his stomach tighten, because he had learned that quiet did not mean empty. Helplessness came from how fast this learning had to happen. A man could not take his time becoming careful. The land did not wait for him to grow used to it. The platoon might move again before he knew the names of the men beside him. The next field might ask for the lesson before anyone had explained it. A veteran might give a short warning, but a warning was not the same as experience. The new man had to borrow fear from others until he had enough of his own. The lesson was simple, but there was nothing clean about it. Experience is not always wisdom calmly gathered over years. In war, experience can be a wound seen from a few feet away. It can be a body left near a hedge. It can be the sudden knowledge that a safe-looking place has already lied once. Normandy forced men to become older in the mind, because staying young in the mind was dangerous. Innocence was not a moral failure, but it could get a man killed. Modern life often lets people learn from small mistakes, but in Normandy, one mistake could become a final lesson shared by everyone except the man who made it. A sad scene could happen in a garden behind a house. The grass was trampled, but not ruined. A low wall stood near the corner. A few tools might still lie near a shed, left there by civilians who had fled or hidden. A new soldier saw the wall and thought of shelter. He moved toward it because shelter was what every frightened body wanted. An older man saw the simple wall and stopped short. He noticed the angle. He noticed the window beyond it. He noticed the opening that was too easy to approach. The new man understood a second too late, or perhaps not at all. What stays with me most is how quickly a place could take away a man's beginner's hope and replace it with the tired caution of someone much older. This was how Normandy changed units. The line between new men and old men did not depend only on age, rank, or months in uniform. It depended on who had seen enough to flinch before the shot, duck before the warning, and distrust Tharquiet before anyone else mentioned it. A man could arrive on Tuesday and look different by Friday. Not braver in a clean way, not wiser in a noble way, just more careful, more silent, more aware that the land had rules written in blood. The larger truth is that Normandy after D-Day did not give soldiers time to remain untouched. It pressed experience into them through fear, repetition, and loss. A man who survived the beach still had to survive the education of hedges, fields, orchards, lanes, and gardens. He learned from the dead, from the wounded, from the frightened, and from the strange pauses before violence returned. In a few days, a replacement could become one of the old faces looking at the next new man with the same tired warning in his eyes. Normandy turned survivors into old soldiers quickly, not because time passed fast, but because danger repeated itself without mercy. Every hedge, path, wall, and quiet garden could teach a lesson that arrived through blood instead of words. After those lessons, the next sound to haunt the soldier would often come from above, when mortar fire fell before anyone fully understood where it had begun. Mortar fire became one of the ordinary nightmares of Normandy because it did not need to be seen before it arrived. A soldier could be crouched in a field, standing near a lane, waiting beside a farmhouse wall, or trying to drink from a canteen during a short pause. The hedge in front of him might be still. The road might be blocked but quiet. The orchard beyond the bank might show nothing except trees, leaves, and broken branches. Nothing in the scene had to change before the first round fell. That was why Morton's suited Normandy so well. The land was full of places where the shooter could stay hidden and still reach men on the other side of a hedge. A German mortar crew did not need a clear open field like a rifleman might. It could fire over hedgerows, over banks of earth, over farm walls, and into the small spaces where soldiers gathered because there was nowhere else to go. A field, a road junction, a yard, a ditch, or the edge of a village could become a target without the men inside it ever seeing the weapon. The first sign might be the ground jumping beside someone's boots. It might be a sudden crack and blast in a place that had seemed empty a second earlier. Dirt struck faces. Leaves came down. A man's ears slammed shut under the pressure. Someone who had been kneeling beside him was no longer kneeling in the same way. The soldier did not need to understand the angle, the range, or the crew that fired it. His body understood the meaning before his mind caught up. It is almost cruel how mortar fire could make even an empty sky feel guilty, because the thing falling on a man seemed to come from nowhere he could fight back against. The body learned to fear the pause before the next round. After the first explosion, men flattened themselves into ditches, pressed against hedgerows, or curled beside stone walls that suddenly felt too low, their mouths filled with grit, their fingers clawed at soil without purpose. Their backs tightened while they waited for the next impact. Some held their breath without knowing it. Some tried to listen, but the ringing in their ears made listening useless. Mortar fire not only wounds flesh, it taught the muscles to expect another blow from above. Helplessness came from having no clear answer. A rifle could be aimed at a visible enemy. A machine gun could sometimes be located by its sound. A mortar could seem to belong to the whole landscape. The men knew the firing position might be behind trees, behind a village, beyond a hedge, or somewhere a forward observer had marked them. But knowing that did not help the man lying in the mud. He could not crawl under the earth. He could not make the road wider. He could not order the next shell to land somewhere else. The lesson was simple and ugly. In Normandy, cover was not always protection. A hedge might block sight, but it did not block a falling shell. A wall might hide a man from a rifle, but not from fragments dropping into a yard. A ditch might save him from one burst and expose him to another. War made soldiers search for shelter, and mortar fire reminded them that shelter had limits. Safety was not a place. It was only a temporary guess. Modern people often think quiet means a danger has passed, but in Normandy, quiet could simply be the space between one mortar round and the next. A sad scene could happen during a halt that looked harmless at first. A few men gathered near the side of a narrow road, tired enough to sit even on wet ground. One leaned against a bank, another checked his boot, a third looked toward the hedges, not because he saw anything, but because habit had taught him to distrust stillness. Their unit had stopped for only a short time. Supplies were moving somewhere behind them. Someone waited for an order to go forward again. The first round landed in the field beside the road, and the rest of the moment broke apart. A helmet rolled near the ditch. A canteen lay open in the mud. One man tried to rise and could not. What stays with me most is how a soldier could be doing something completely ordinary, resting his legs, adjusting a strap, swallowing water, and suddenly become part of the ground around him. This changed the way men experienced every pause. Rest did not feel like rest when a mortar could reach it. A small group standing together became a risk. A road junction felt too crowded. A farmhouse yard felt too easy to mark. Men spread out when they could, but Normandy often pushed them into tight spaces anyway. Hedges, lanes, vehicles, walls and orders gathered bodies in places where mortars could punish the gathering. The weapon fed on the shape of the land and the needs of the army. The larger truth is that mortar fire made Normandy feel unsafe even when nothing moved. It turned waiting into a form of fear. It made the soldier suspicious of silence, suspicious of open patches, suspicious of any place where men had to stop together. The enemy could be unseen, the weapon hidden, the round already in the air, and the soldier would only learn about it when the earth lifted. After enough days, a man did not need explosions to feel watched. The possibility was enough. Mortar fire in Normandy became terrifying because it arrived before understanding, and often before warning. It could fall into fields, lanes, yards, and crowded pauses where men had gathered only because war left them no better place to stand. The next lesson would come from steel itself, when Allied tanks that looked powerful on paper were forced into hedgerow country where even armour could become blind. Allied tanks looked powerful when a man thought about them from a distance. They had armour, guns, engines, weight, and the hard confidence of modern industries. To a tired infantryman, the sight of a tank nearby could feel comforting for a moment. It was large, it was loud, it could smash through weak walls, fire into suspected positions, and carry more protection than any man walking beside it. After days of hedges, mud, mortars, and hidden guns, a soldier could want to believe that steel would make the next field easier. That belief had an ordinary reason behind it. Tanks had helped armies break through places where men alone would suffer badly. They could bring firepower forward. They could frighten defenders. They could push past obstacles that stopped infantry. On a road or in open ground, they seemed to offer a kind of answer to fear. A man walking behind one might feel, briefly, that the machine in front of him was taking the danger first. Its armour looked like protection. Its gun looked like certainty. Its tracks looked as if they could force the countryside to make room. In the bocage, the tank's size could become part of its trouble. Tall hedgerows cut its view short. Sunken roads narrowed its choices. Mud slowed its movement. A bend in a lane could hide an anti-tank gun until the range was horribly close. A hedge could keep the crew from seeing what infantrymen feared on the other side. The same machine that looked strong in theory could enter a small Normandy lane and suddenly become too large, too visible, and too blind. Steel did not stop the land from hiding things. It is almost bitterly funny that a machine built to dominate battle could be made helpless by hedges, corners, and roads that had once belonged to farmers. The tank crew felt this in their own closed world. Inside the vehicle, the air was hot, cramped, and full of metal, oil, sweat, and vibration. Vision came through narrow openings. Noise made every sound harder to understand. A man inside the tank could know he was protected from some dangers and still feel trapped inside a heavy target. Outside, the infantryman had a different fear. He needed the tank, but he also knew the tank attracted fire. Walking near it could mean walking near the thing every hidden German gun wanted to hit. The helplessness came from needing each other while fearing what that need cost. The tank needed infantry close enough to watch hedges, ditches, and corners where enemy soldiers might crawl near with explosives or hidden weapons. The infantry needed the tank's gun, armor, and weight to help break positions that rifles alone could not handle. But staying close was dangerous. Moving away was dangerous too. A soldier beside the tank might feel safer for 1 minute, then feel exposed when the enemy aimed everything at the steel shape beside him. The lesson was simple. Modern machinery does not erase old fears when the ground turns against it. A tank is powerful only when it can see, move, and work with the men around it. In Normandy, the Bocage cut sight into pieces and forced machines into narrow passages. The Germans understood this. They did not always need tanks in open fields. They could wait near roads, behind hedges, in villages, or at angles where the tank had little room to turn. Armour mattered, but so did where the armour had to go. Modern people often imagine technology as the thing that removes danger. But in Normandy, even the strongest machine could become another frightened body when the land made it blind. A sad scene could begin with a tank nosing into a narrow lane while infantry moved along both sides. The hedges rose high enough to block most of the view. Mud pulled at boots. The tank's engine filled the lane with a heavy vibration. A few men glanced at the banks, trying to watch every opening. For a moment, the machine looked like it controlled the road. Then a shot came from a hidden angle. The tank stopped hard. Smoke pushed from it. The infantrymen dropped beside the hedges, suddenly aware that the protection they had followed had become a burning marker for more fire. What stays with me most is the sight of men and machines trapped together, each one depending on the other, and neither one truly able to promise safety. This changed the advance through Normandy. Tanks could still help, and often did, but they could not simply solve the Bocage. Engineers had to cut through hedges. Infantry had to move close. Crews had to trust men they could barely see outside the vehicle. Officers had to coordinate fire in a country that broke every view into fragments. A tank might destroy a position, then become stuck, blocked, or exposed at the next hedge. Its presence did not make the fear disappear. It only changed the shape of the fear around it. The larger truth is that Normandy forced a modern army into an old and stubborn landscape. Steel, engines, radios, artillery, and planning all mattered. But they had to pass through lanes, fields, banks, and villages that limited what they could do. The soldier on foot saw this clearly. Machines could be strong, but the man still had to walk beside them, crawl near them, protect them, fear them, and sometimes watch them burn. The war did not become clean because it had tanks. It became heavier. Allied tanks brought armour, firepower, and industrial strength into Normandy, but the Bocage could turn that strength into blindness. Infantry had to stay close to protect the machines, even while fearing the fire those machines attracted. The same hard lesson waited in the stone villages ahead, where houses, windows, walls, and narrow streets could turn another ordinary place into a small fortress. Stone villages in Normandy could look like places where a soldier might finally find shelter. After fields, hedges, ditches, and lanes, the sight of houses could stir a small human hope. A wall looked solid, a doorway looked like a cover, a church tower looked like a fixed point in a world of confusing green. Even a farmyard with broken tools, scattered straw, and closed shutters could seem less frightening than another field where nothing could be seen. A village belonged to ordinary life, and tired men wanted ordinary life to mean safety. That hope had a reason. People had lived there before the armies arrived. They had slept behind those walls, eaten at those tables, used those courtyards, stored animals in those barns, and walked those narrow streets without thinking of angles of fire. The houses were made to keep out the weather, not to trap infantry. The church was made for prayer, not observation. The garden walls had once marked family space, not a line of death. A soldier could look at these places and feel, for 1 second, that human life had left something gentle behind. A closed shutter could hold silence without being empty. A dark upper window could watch a street better than the men entering it could watch back. A stone wall that looked like shelter from one side could hide a firing position on the other. A barn could be quiet because it had been abandoned, or because someone inside was waiting. The village did not need to change its face to become dangerous. It only needed men with weapons to use what was already there. It is almost insulting how a village built for families, animals, bread, and Sunday mornings could be turned into a little fortress by a few guns and enough fear. The body felt the village fighting differently from the field fighting. A soldier no longer had only hedges to fear. He had windows above him, doors beside him, walls in front of him, and alleys that turned too sharply to trust. His neck strained from looking upward. His shoulders pressed close to the stone. His boots scraped through broken glass, plaster mud, and loose farm debris. Every doorway asked him to pause. Every room could be empty, or not empty enough. His breathing sounded too loud when he entered a house that still held the shape of normal life. Helplessness came from having to move through spaces meant for civilians but used by war. A soldier could not know from outside whether a room was clear. He could not know whether a cellar held villagers, Germans, wounded men, or nothing. He could not know whether a shot would come from the next house, or from the one his unit had just passed. The village broke certainty into pieces. Taking one building did not mean taking the street. Taking the street did not mean taking the courtyard. Taking the courtyard did not mean the church tower was safe. The lesson was quiet and cruel. Buildings do not have to be large to make war costly. A small village can slow an army because it gives defenders corners, height, stone, cover, and places to vanish between one shot and the next. Open ground can frighten a soldier because it leaves him exposed. A village frightens him because it offers too many places where death can hide, close to human furniture, farm tools, beds and walls. Normandy made the war smaller in size, but not lighter in cost. Modern people often think of a village as a place to pass through slowly and peacefully, but in Normandy, even a few houses could become a hard little battlefield that took men apart room by room. A sad scene could begin at the edge of a street. The first house had a broken roof. Smoke stained the stones above one window. A cart lay tipped beside a wall. An Allied soldier moved past a doorway that seemed empty, while another watched the upper floor with his rifle, raised. Somewhere in the yard, a bucket still sat near a pump, as if someone had left it in the middle of an ordinary chore. Then fire came from a place the men had already looked at and dismissed. One soldier fell against the wall. The others pressed into doorways that no longer felt like shelter. What stays with me most is how war could enter a family village and make every familiar object suspicious, every window hostile, and every room too dangerous to trust. This changed the feeling of the advance. The men were not simply moving across land anymore. They were entering the remains of other people's lives while trying not to die inside them. A kitchen could become a cover, a bedroom could become a firing point. A barn could become a place where a medic could crawl to reach someone. A church wall could shield men for a minute, then draw artillery the next. The village held military value, but it also held memory. That made the destruction feel heavier, even when no one had time to say so. The larger truth is that Normandy, after D-Day, was not only a struggle against German resistance. It was a struggle against a landscape where ordinary places had been turned into military problems. Fields became traps, roads became bottlenecks, villages became forts. The soldier had to keep moving through them because the campaign demanded it, but each place took something from him. A village could cost hours, ammunition, vehicles, bodies, and belief. When it was finally taken, it might not look won. It might only look empty, broken, and quieter than before. The stone villages of Normandy did not offer the easy shelter a tired soldier might hope for after the fields and hedges. Their walls, windows, barns, courtyards, and narrow streets could turn a handful of houses into a separate battle. Inside those villages, the next fear waited at a smaller scale, because even a doorway, a yard, or a silent room could feel like stepping into a trap. Some places in Normandy did not kill men through one large battle that could be clearly named. They killed through doors, yards, windows, walls, and rooms that had to be entered one at a time. A soldier could move from a lane into a farmyard and find himself facing a kind of fear that felt smaller than the beach, but more personal. There was no great open rush. There was no single wide target ahead. There was only a half-open door, a dark window, a low wall, and the knowledge that someone might be waiting behind any of them. That was what made the scene so ordinary and so hard to bear. A yard was not supposed to be a battlefield. It was where a family might have kept tools, stacked wood, washed clothes, fed animals, or crossed from the house to the barn without thinking. A doorway was supposed to lead into a room. A window was supposed to let in daylight. A corner of a wall was supposed to be part of a home, not a place where a man stopped breathing because he could not tell whether it was safe to move. The soldier had to treat all of it as dangerous because the war had already taken away its old meaning. A house could look empty for just long enough to make a man step closer. The door might hang open because civilians had fled in haste, or because someone inside wanted it to look that way. A window might show no face, but still cover the yard. A wall might seem like protection until fire came from the side. The soldier did not need to see the trap for the trap to work. He only needed to trust one ordinary object for 1 second too long. It is almost obscene how war could take a family courtyard and make a trained soldier study it, as if the stones themselves were waiting to betray him. The body carried this kind of fear in a slow, tiring way. A man did not always run. Often he crept, paused, bent his neck, shifted his rifle, and listened. His eyes moved from the door to the window to the roofline, from the roofline to the barn, then back again because nothing had become certain. His knees hurt from crouching. His shoulders tightened from expecting a shot. His throat dried because every quiet room seemed to ask him to enter first. The fear did not come in one explosion. It gathered in the muscles over many minutes. Helplessness came from having to keep going anyway. A soldier could not leave every house unchecked. He could not walk around every courtyard. He could not assume that a silent building was harmless. The unit had to move through the village, and the village was made up of these small places. Someone had to cross the yard. Someone had to look through the doorway. Someone had to cover the window. Someone had to step into the room that everyone else feared. The work was simple in words and terrible in the body. The lesson was plain. War not only destroys life by smashing large things, it also ruins trust in small things. A bed, a table, a staircase, a garden wall, a barn door, a churchyard gate, all of them can become part of the soldier's fear when fighting passes through civilian space. Normandy after D-Day turned the familiar into a problem. It made men question every sign of normal life, because normal life could hide a rifle, a machine gun, a wounded enemy, a mine, or nothing at all. The not knowing was enough. Modern people walk through courtyards, hallways, and doorways without thinking, but in Normandy a soldier could feel his whole body tighten before entering a room that once held nothing more dangerous than a family meal. A sad scene could begin with a farmyard after shelling. Broken tiles lay near the wall. A wooden door stood partly open. A cart leaned at an angle beside the barn. Somewhere near the house, A chair had been knocked over and left in the mud. An Allied soldier moved toward the doorway with another man covering the window above him. The place looked abandoned. It might have been abandoned. That was the cruelty of it. He had to fear it anyway. When a shot cracked from inside or nearby, the yard became smaller than the body could endure. Men dropped behind stones, and the doorway that had looked like an entrance became a mouth no one wanted to approach. What stays with me most is the way these men had to become suspicious of the same spaces where ordinary people had once tried to live quietly. This made the fighting feel dirty in a way that was hard to explain. The soldier was not only moving through military ground, he was moving through broken homes. He saw torn bedding, smashed dishes, empty cupboards, children's things, farm tools, and animals left loose or dead. But he could not afford to feel only pity. Pity had to wait behind caution. A room could hold sorrow and danger at the same time. A yard could look like a family's loss and still be a place where a man might be killed. That mixture wore on him. The larger truth is that Normandy, after D-Day, became exhausting because it forced soldiers to doubt the world at the smallest level. A battlefield in a field was frightening, but at least it looked like ground being fought over. A battlefield inside a home felt like something more deeply broken. Every door had to be judged, every window had to be watched, every wall had to be approached carefully. The soldier was not only afraid of death, he was tired from needing to suspect everything that once belonged to peace. In some places in Normandy, men did not die in one famous charge, but in yards, doorways, rooms, and corners that looked too ordinary to be remembered. The fighting after D-Day became slow, dirty, and intimate because civilian spaces had been turned into firing points and traps. Farther east, around Caen, that same grinding pattern grew into a larger struggle, where British and Canadian troops were pulled into weeks of punishment that made victory feel heavy before it arrived. Caen was not supposed to become a name that felt so heavy. To many soldiers landing in Normandy, it was a city on the map, an objective, a place that had to be taken so the front could open and the advance could continue. From a distance, it could sound like a clear military task. Move inland, push through resistance, take the city, and create space for the armies behind the beach. But once British and Canadian troops were pulled into the fighting around Caen, the words stopped sounding simple. It became villages, fields, artillery, tanks, ruined streets, and days that did not move as quickly as the plans had hoped. That hope had an ordinary reason behind it. Armies need roads, towns, high ground, and open routes. Caen mattered because it sat in a place that could help unlock movement beyond the beaches. Taking it quickly would make the wider campaign easier, at least on paper. Soldiers were used to hearing that a town had to fall, a road had to open, or a line had to be broken. Those phrases sounded firm and practical. They did not carry the mud under the boots, the smoke in the fields, or the bodies left near the edge of a village. Caen did not fall into place the way a neat plan might suggest. German forces held strong positions, brought in armour, used villages, fields and defensive lines, and made the approach costly. The city and its surrounding area became a place where British and Canadian troops did not simply advance through space. They had to push through layers of resistance. One village could be taken only for another to wait beyond it. One stretch of ground could be crossed only after artillery, tanks, and infantry had all paid something into it. Progress came, but it often came with smoke behind it. It is almost cruel how a city can look like one objective on a map, while the men reaching it have to pay for every road, field, orchard, wall, and broken street along the way. The body felt the slow grind more than the map ever could. A British or Canadian soldier near Caen might spend hours under shell fire, crouched near a hedge, pressed into a ditch, or moving beside armour through open ground that felt too exposed. His ears were filled with blasts, his throat dried from dust and fear. His legs ached from stopping and starting, crouching and rising, running and dropping again. When tanks burned, heat and smoke marked the places where confidence had failed. When infantry moved forward, each man carried the weight of knowing that the next field might already be measured by enemy guns. Helplessness came from how large the fighting became around small human bodies. A soldier could understand that Cannes mattered. He could understand that the Germans had to be fixed, pressured, and broken there. But understanding did not make the shelling easier to endure. It did not make an exposed field shorter. It did not make a burning tank less frightening to pass. Men were part of a larger design, but they experienced it as noise, smoke, waiting, orders, and the repeated feeling of being asked to cross ground that had no interest in letting them through. The lesson was plain. Normandy after D-Day was not only an American story in the bocage, it was a whole front where different armies suffered in different kinds of terrain and under different pressures. Around Cannes, British and Canadian troops were drawn into a battle of pressure, armour, artillery, villages, and urban destruction. Their fight helped hold and wear down German strength, but that strategic meaning did not make the price feel clean. A battlefield can be useful on a command map, and still be miserable to every man standing inside it. Modern people can say that Caen was important for the campaign, but importance is a cold comfort to a soldier lying in a field while shells cut the day into pieces. A sad scene could sit outside a village on the approach to the city. A Canadian soldier crouched near the roadside while a tank burned farther ahead, its shape dark against smoke. The fields around him were not empty, but they felt abandoned by anything gentle. A few men waited for the next order, faces grey with dust, rifles held close, eyes fixed on houses that might already have been shelled and still might not be safe. Somewhere beyond them lay Caen, the name everyone knew. But in that moment, the city was not a place. It was another reason to keep moving through fear. What stays with me most is that men could be part of a famous operation and sizzle it as one ruined lane, one burning vehicle, and one friend missing from the line. The fighting around Cannes widened the truth of Normandy. The real killing after D-Day did not belong to one beach, one army, or one kind of soldier. It spread across sectors, units, villages, roads, and cities. British and Canadian forces faced heavy German resistance, while American units fought through hedgerows elsewhere. Civilians endured bombardment and ruin. German defenders were worn down under pressure from land, sea, and air. The whole region became a place where different forms of suffering met and fed each other. The larger truth is that victory in Normandy did not unfold as one steady push from beach to liberation. It came through delays, mistakes, resistance, bombardment, and the slow breaking of places that had once held ordinary life. Cannes showed this clearly. A city expected to fall sooner became a symbol of how hard the campaign could become once the landing was over. The battle not only consumes military strength, it consumed streets, houses, nerves, time, and the belief that the hardest part had already passed. The struggle around Cannes showed that Normandy after D-Day was not just a maze of hedges for American infantry, but a wider front where British and Canadian troops were pulled into a slow, crushing fight. Villages, open ground, artillery, armour, and ruined streets made progress feel costly long before the city was fully taken. Farther west, another name would carry the same bitter lesson, as Saint-Lô became a place where victory looked less like triumph and more like rubble stepped over in silence. Saint-Lô did not wait for American soldiers like a clean prize at the end of a hard road. It waited behind hedgerows, muddy lanes, broken fields, small villages, hidden guns, and days that seemed to spend men faster than distance. On a map, the city could look like a point to be reached, a place that mattered because roads met there and movement beyond it could open. To the soldier on the ground, it was not a point. It was another reason to keep crawling through Normandy when the body had already been asked for too much. That was the ordinary reason Saint-Lô mattered so much. Armies need doors. They need crossings, road networks, towns, and places where movement can gather and then break outward. St. Lo became one of those doors. Taking it could help push the campaign beyond the Bocage and give the Allies more room to move. Officers could explain it that way, and they were not wrong. But the men moving toward it did not feel strategy in clean words. They felt mud under their knees, branches against their helmets, shells falling near lanes, and the same green walls cutting their view again and again. Each approach to the city seemed to ask for payment before allowing the next one. A hedge had to be crossed, a road had to be cleared, a village had to be entered, a German position had to be found only after it had already been fired, a wounded man had to be dragged back if anyone could reach him. A field that looked small could still take hours. A lane that looked useful could become blocked by a burning vehicle. St. Lo came closer, but never in a way that felt simple. It came closer through pieces of men. It is almost bitter how a city can be called an objective, as if the word is clean enough to hide all the bodies spent trying to reach it. The body carried the cost of that movement. An American soldier pushing towards St. Lo might be wet from rain, stiff from sleeping badly, and sore from carrying gear through fields where every step had to be judged. His eyes burned from watching hedges. His hands were dirty from digging, crawling, and gripping his rifle. His back ached from packs, straps, and the sudden need to throw himself down when fire opened. Even when he was not hit, the campaign wore him down. He could feel each day inside his knees, shoulders, stomach, and nerves. Helplessness came from seeing that victory could demand destruction before it arrived. The soldiers were trying to take a city, but by the time they neared it, the place itself had been battered by war. Roads were damaged, buildings were broken, smoke and dust changed the shape of the streets. The city that mattered as a route and a symbol was also a place where people had lived, slept, cooked, prayed, and tried to survive. The closer the soldiers came to success, the more success looked like ruin. The lesson was plain. War often opens a path by breaking what stands around it. St. Lo mattered because it could help movement, but the price of opening that door was paid by soldiers, civilians, buildings, streets, and memory. A city can be important on a command map and still be heartbreaking when seen at ground level. The military value does not erase the human cost. It only explains why the cost was demanded. Modern people often imagine victory as a flag raised over a place, but at St. Lo, victory could look more like exhausted men stepping through dust where a city used to be. A sad scene could happen after the worst of the fighting had passed through. A soldier entered a street that did not feel like a street anymore. Stones lay across the road. Walls stood open to the air. A doorway led into a room with no roof above it. Dust clung to his sleeves. Somewhere nearby, another man sat on a pile of rubble, with his helmet in his hands, not celebrating, only resting because his legs had finally found something that did not move. The city had been taken, or nearly taken, but nothing about the scene looked like the kind of victory people imagine from far away. What stays with me most is how a man could help win a city and still feel, while standing inside it, that something human had been lost beyond recovery. St. Lo gathered the truth of Normandy into one ruined place. The Bocage had slowed the American advance field by field. German resistance had made each road costly. Shells, mines, machine guns, and anti-tank weapons had turned movement into a repeated test. By the time the city came into Allied hands, it carried the weight of all those small struggles. It was not only a location captured, it was the visible result of weeks in which progress had been made through exhaustion, pressure, and death. The larger truth is that after D-Day, victory did not always arrive with a clear feeling of relief. Sometimes it arrived as silence after bombardment, as rubble under boots, as men too tired to speak, as civilians looking at what had been done to the place they called home. St. Lo showed that the campaign was not a clean march inland. It was a grinding passage through a living region, and every important door that opened seemed to leave damage around the frame. Saint-Lô became a symbol of victory that no longer looked like victory, because the city was reached through hedges, villages, mud, fire, and loss. When it finally opened the way forward, it stood battered enough to remind every soldier that strategic success could still look like human ruin. That same ruin reached beyond the armies, because the people of Normandy were trapped between liberation and destruction in the homes they were supposed to be saved inside. Civilians in Normandy did not experience liberation as a clean picture. They did not simply stand beside village roads, wave at passing soldiers, and step safely into a peaceful future. Many had already lived through German occupation, shortages, fear, suspicion, and the daily pressure of being watched. Then the invasion came, and with it came bombing, artillery, burning vehicles, retreating Germans, advancing Allies, broken roads, damaged farms, and families hiding wherever the walls still seemed strong enough. For the people living there, freedom arrived with noise, dust, and danger around it. That was the ordinary reason their suffering became so tangled. They were not soldiers, but the war moved through their homes anyway. A family might hide in a cellar while shells fell over the village. A farmer might watch fields become firing positions. A mother might try to keep children quiet while men with weapons passed near the house. Someone might have to decide whether to stay, flee, share food, bury the dead, search for water, or wait one more night under a roof that might not survive. These were not grand decisions from a history book. They were small choices made under pressure, with no safe answer. The cruel part was that the armies did not have to hate civilians to destroy civilian life. Allied soldiers came to drive the Germans out, but the tools they carried were still the tools of war. Bombs did not know which house held a German position and which held a frightened family. Artillery did not understand old bedrooms, kitchen tables, wedding photographs, or a child's bed against the wall. A village could be liberated and damaged by the same movement. A home could be saved from occupation and ruined by the fighting that made that saving possible. It is almost unbearable that people could wait for liberation for years, only to meet it first as broken glass, falling stones, and the sound of shells landing near their own street. The body of a civilian carried a different kind of war. It was not weighed down by rifles and packs, but by fear, hunger, smoke, dust, lost sleep, and the strain of protecting people who could not protect themselves. An old man might cough in a cellar thick with damp air. A child might shake without understanding which army was near. A woman might climb from shelter and find her hands trembling as she searched through rubble for something useful. A blanket, a pot, a photograph, a shoe. The war entered the body through waiting, hiding, digging, carrying, and waking again to more danger. Helplessness sat at the centre of civilian life in Normandy. Soldiers at least belonged to armies, had weapons, orders, uniforms, and some place inside the machinery of battle. Civilians had almost none of that. They could not command the Germans to leave faster. They could not ask Allied artillery to be more careful. They could not move a front line away from their village. They could only endure decisions made far above them and then live inside the damage left on the ground. Liberation was coming, but they had no control over how much of their world would still be standing when it arrived. The lesson was plain and uncomfortable. War does not only punish the people holding weapons, it also punishes the people living where the weapons are used. A military map may show towns as objectives, road junctions, defensive points, or obstacles, but for civilians, those places are homes. A road is not only a route for tanks, it is the road to a neighbour, a church, a field, a school, a market. When that road becomes a battlefield, ordinary life is not paused neatly. It is torn apart. Modern people often imagine being liberated as a moment of pure relief, but in Normandy, relief could arrive to smoke, hunger, ruined walls, and the knowledge that survival had come with a bill no civilian chose to pay. A sad scene could happen in a village just after the fighting had moved on. A French family came out from a cellar, blinking into grey daylight. The street they knew was filled with stone, glass, torn wood, and the remains of someone's cart. An Allied soldier stood nearby, dirty and exhausted, holding his rifle low because there was no clear enemy in front of him at that moment. He saw a woman kneel beside a broken doorway and touch the stones as if the house might still answer her. He had come as part of a liberating army, but what lay around him did not feel clean enough for pride. What stays with me most is the look that must have passed between soldiers and civilians when both sides knew that rescue and ruin had arrived together. This made Normandy heavier for the Allied soldier, too. He could believe in the cause and still feel the weight of what the cause required. He could know the Germans had to be pushed out and still feel sick at the sight of a family searching through a shattered home. He could accept that artillery saved soldiers' lives and still understand that artillery had no gentle hand. The war forced him to carry two truths at once. He was there to free people, and the process of freeing them could destroy the places they loved. The larger truth is that Normandy, after D-Day, was not only a story of armies advancing through hedges and towns. It was also a story of civilians trapped between occupation and liberation, between retreating German forces and advancing Allied firepower, between the hope of being freed and the fear of being killed by the battle that brought freedom closer. The people of Normandy paid for decisions they did not make. Their homes became cover, targets, shelters, ruins, and memories. The campaign moved forward, but civilian life did not simply resume behind it. It had to be gathered from debris. Civilians in Normandy were not standing outside the war, waiting safely for liberation to arrive. They were caught inside the same fields, roads, villages, bombardments, and ruins that soldiers moved through with weapons in hand. The next cruelty was that some liberators had to walk through homes their own side had helped destroy, carrying victory into rooms where families were still searching for what remained. Liberators in Normandy did not always enter villages the way people imagine liberators should. They did not always come down clean roads towards smiling families and untouched houses. Often they came through smoke, broken walls, shell craters, shattered roofs, burned vehicles, and streets where the dust had not settled yet. A soldier might see a civilian raise a relief hand, then look past that same person and see a house split open by the firepower that helped him reach the village. The welcome and the ruin could stand in the same street. That was the ordinary reason the moment felt so difficult. The Allies needed artillery, naval guns, aircraft, tanks, and heavy weapons because the Germans were not leaving Normandy politely. A village might hold enemy soldiers, machine guns, observers, mortars, or anti-tank weapons. A farmhouse could hide position. A church tower could watch the roads. A stone wall could shield a gun crew. If the Allies tried to move without firepower, more soldiers would die. So the guns came first, and sometimes the guns struck the same places where civilians had kept their tables, beds, clothing, letters, and photographs. A soldier could walk into a newly freed village and understand the contradiction before anyone explained it. He had helped push the German army back, but the path behind him was not gentle. A family might be alive because the battle had moved through, and homeless because the battle had moved through. A road might be open for Allied vehicles because the buildings beside it had been smashed. A room might no longer have a wall, and inside that room there might still be a chair, a cracked dish, or a picture frame hanging crookedly where ordinary life had been interrupted. It is almost cruel that a man could arrive as a liberator and still have to step over the broken pieces of the very life he had come to help restore. The body carried that contradiction heavily. The soldier was already tired from moving through hedges, fields, shellfire, and villages that might kill him from any window. His hands were dirty. His boots were thick with mud and plaster dust. His eyes burned from smoke. Then he had to stand among civilians who had suffered from the same battle that kept him alive. He might not know what to do with his face. Relief, guilt, exhaustion, caution and fear could all sit inside him at once. He still had to hold his rifle, because the village might not be fully safe, even while someone nearby searched for a blanket in the ruins. There was very little power in that moment. The soldier could not undo the bombardment. The civilian could not demand a cleaner rescue from men fighting through a defended town. The officer could not promise that the next village would be spared. The artillery crew miles away could not see the family photographs on the wall before firing. Everyone was trapped inside the machinery of war, where survival often depended on force, and force did not know how to be tender. A village could be saved from occupation and still be injured by the saving. The lesson was plain and uncomfortable. Good causes do not make war clean. A necessary battle can still ruin innocent lives. A liberating army can still bring destruction, because the weapons that break an enemy position also break roofs, walls, barns, churches, and rooms where children once slept. Normandy makes that hard truth difficult to avoid. The moral reason for fighting did not erase the damage done by fighting. It only made the damage harder to carry. Modern people often want history to separate rescue from destruction, but in Normandy the two could arrive together, in the same convoy, on the same road, and into the same ruined village. A sad scene could begin a few hours after a village changed hands. An Allied soldier stood near a broken doorway while civilians came out from a cellar. A woman moved stones from what had been the front of her home. An older man carried a small bundle wrapped in cloth. A child stared at a tank on the road with no expression that looked like celebration. The soldier wanted to be glad the Germans had gone. He wanted the village to feel free, but the street was full of broken beams, dust, and things too personal to look at for long. A dining table lay tilted in a room without an outside wall. What stays with me most is how quiet that kind of guilt must have been, because no one had to accuse the soldier for him to understand what the ruins were saying. This is what made Normandy after D-Day more than a military advance. Every village carried more than tactical value. It carried people who had already endured occupation and now had to endure liberation by fire. For the Allied soldier, the suffering of civilians made the campaign heavier than the map suggested. He could still believe he was doing the right thing. He could still know the Germans had to be pushed back. But belief did not remove the sight of families digging through rubble, or the knowledge that the army that freed them had also helped break the place where they lived. The larger truth is that pushing a front through a living region means the war not only touches soldiers, it enters kitchens, bedrooms, barns, orchards, churches, roads, and family memories. Normandy after D-Day was a battlefield, but it was also somebody's home. That is why victory there could feel dirty even when it was necessary. The Allies were not wrong to fight. The Germans were not going to leave because someone asked, but the people caught between them paid in ways that never fit neatly into words like advance, objective, or liberation. Normandy forced liberators to walk through the damage that liberation itself had helped create. The same firepower that kept Allied soldiers alive could tear open houses, scatter families, and leave civilians searching through rooms that no longer had walls. After the ruins came another enemy without a uniform, as rain, mud, exhaustion, and sleeplessness began wearing down the men who still had to keep moving. Rain in Normandy did not need to fall heavily to make life miserable. A little rain was enough to soften the lanes, thicken the fields, fill shells, and turn the ground under a soldier's boots into something that pulled at every step. After hedges, hidden guns, burned vehicles, and ruined villages, the weather might have seemed like a smaller enemy. It did not shout. It did not wear a uniform. It did not aim a rifle from behind a wall. It simply settled into the soil, the clothes, the blankets, the socks, and the bones of men who had already been used too hard. That was the ordinary reason it became so dangerous. A soldier needed his body to obey him. He needed his feet to carry him through fields. He needed his hands to hold a rifle. He needed his eyes to stay open during long hours of watching. He needed sleep, warmth, dry socks, clean skin, and enough rest to think clearly. Normandy gave him very little of that. Rain made the roads soft. Mud made every movement slower. Damp clothing clung to the body. Foxholes filled with water. Blankets stayed wet. Boots rubbed the same sore places again and again. A man could survive a burst of machine gun fire and still be slowly broken by a wet night afterward. He might crawl into a shallow hole and find cold water at the bottom. He might sit with his knees pulled close, trying to keep his rifle dry, while his own sleeves stayed soaked. He might sleep for a few minutes, wake with his neck stiff, and realize that nothing in him felt rested. The killing did not always arrive in one violent moment. Sometimes the body was simply asked to continue after it had stopped being ready. It is almost insulting how a man could be trained to face bullets, only to be defeated piece by wet socks, mud, cold food, and a hole full of rainwater. The body felt the wear in plain ways. Feet softened inside damp boots until blisters opened. Skin rubbed raw under straps. Shoulders ached from carrying gear that felt heavier when wet. Fingers stiffened in the cold. A man's back hurt from crouching, digging, sleeping badly, and throwing himself down too often. His eyes burned from lack of sleep. His stomach cramped from bad meals, hurried meals, or no meal at the right time. Even his thoughts became slower. Exhaustion made fear harder to manage, and fear made rest harder to reach. Helplessness came from knowing that no single act could fix it. A soldier could not order the sky to clear. He could not dry his uniform properly while still moving. He could not sleep deeply when artillery might fall, when patrols might come, or when orders might arrive before dawn. He could not bathe, change clothes, and lie in a warm bed because the front had not paused for his body. He could only adjust, endure, scrape mud from his boots, wring out what he could, and keep going because everyone else had to keep going too. The lesson was simple. War not only destroys men through wounds, it also spends them through use. A body can be worn down by poor sleep, damp ground, bad food, fear, noise, cold, dirt, and the constant demand to stay ready. Normandy showed this clearly. The same soldier who feared a hidden gun also feared the slow collapse that came from never being properly dry, never being properly clean, and never being properly asleep. The body became a supply line too, and it could run short. Modern people often think of sleep as comfort, but in Normandy, sleep was a broken survival tool, taken in wet holes, beside roads, under hedges, and always with the feeling that it could be interrupted by death. A sad scene could happen before dawn. A soldier sat in a muddy hole with water around his boots. His coat was damp through the shoulders. His hands rested on his rifle, because there was nowhere better to put them. Nearby, another man had fallen asleep, sitting up, chin against his chest, too tired to care that rain still touched his helmet. No one looked brave in that moment. They looked used up. The morning had not even begun, but their bodies were already carrying yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that. What stays with me most is how quiet this suffering was, because a man could be collapsing from exhaustion while still appearing, from a distance, to be simply doing his duty. This kind of wear spreads through whole units. One tired man was a problem. A tired platoon was a danger to itself. Men missed sounds, misunderstood orders, moved too slowly, or became careless because the body could not stay sharp forever. Officers could demand movement, but they could not manufacture rest. Medics could treat wounds, but they could not repair every sleepless night. Supplies could arrive, but not always at the right time or on the right road. The army advanced, but the men inside it were being spent in inches. The larger truth is that Normandy after D-Day was killed in more than visible ways. Bullets, mortars and artillery made the obvious wounds. Mud, rain, cold, dirt and exhaustion made the quieter ones. They weakened judgment, slowed feet, dulled fear into numbness, and made men feel older than they were. A soldier did not need to be hit to be damaged. Sometimes he only needed to be kept wet, tired, hungry, tense, and awake for too long. Normandy could kill with gunfire, but it could also wear men down through rain, mud, sleeplessness, cold clothing, aching feet, and the feeling of never being allowed to fully stop. The body became another battlefield, slowly used up by weather and exhaustion, even when no bullet touched it. When night came, that suffering did not end, because darkness only made the hedges deeper, the sounds stranger, and sleep thinner than ever. Night in Normandy did not bring the kind of rest a soldier's body needed. It lowered itself over the hedgerows, the lanes, the fields, and the broken villages, but it did not make them peaceful. It only made them harder to read. A hedge that had looked suspicious in daylight became a black wall. A ditch that had been muddy and unpleasant became something a man could trip into without seeing it. A lane that had been narrow by day became a strip of darkness between two darker banks. The soldier did not feel the war stop. He felt it become less visible. That was the ordinary reason night became so frightening. In a quiet place, darkness can mean sleep. In Normandy, darkness meant fewer answers. A sound in the brush could be a comrade shifting his position. It could be a civilian moving through a ruined garden. It could be an animal. It could be a German patrol. It could be nothing at all. The body heard every small noise and tried to give it meaning. Leaves moved. Gear clicked, coughed. A stone rolled under a boot. Each sound arrived without a clear shape attached to it. A soldier lying down could close his eyes, but he could not truly leave the battlefield. His boots often stayed on. His rifle stayed within reach. His helmet might still be on his head or beside his hand. He might sleep in a shallow scrape, behind a hedge, near a lane, in a barn, or beside a wall that did not feel as protective as it had in daylight. The body wanted sleep so badly that it could fall into it almost by accident, but the mind stayed near the surface, waiting for a flare, a shell, a whispered warning, or the sudden rush of men moving. It is almost cruel that night, which should have been the soldier's one chance to disappear from the day, only gave the battlefield more places to hide. The body suffered from this kind of sleep in small and lasting ways. A man woke with stiff legs because he had slept curled in gear. His neck hurt from resting on a pack, a helmet, or bare ground. His hands might be cold around his rifle. His socks might still be damp. His eyes burned because he had not slept long enough for sleep to become restorative. Even dreams could not be trusted. A distant thump might pull him awake before he knew whether it was real. A man could wake already afraid, sitting up before his mind had returned fully to the dark. Helplessness came from needing rest and fearing it at the same time. If he slept too deeply, he might miss an alarm. If he stayed awake, he might be too slow the next day. If he took off his boots, he might lose precious seconds when movement began. If he kept them on, his feet never truly recovered. There was no perfect answer. Every choice had a cost. The soldier had to borrow sleep in fragments, the way a poor man borrows time, never enough to feel whole, only enough to continue. The lesson was plain. Sleep in war is not only comfort, it is part of survival. A tired man sees less, thinks more slowly, moves clumsier, and reacts late. But the same war that demands alertness also steals the rest needed to remain alert. Normandy made this worse because the hedgerows, patrols, artillery, mortars, and confusing roads did not vanish after sunset. They became shadows, sounds, rumours, and guesses. Darkness did not remove danger, it removed certainty. Modern people often treat a bad night's sleep as an inconvenience, but in Normandy, a bad night could mean walking into the next morning with slower eyes, weaker legs, and time to stay alive. A sad scene could happen beside a hedgerow after midnight. A few men lay close to the ground, not sleeping exactly, but not fully awake either. One had his coat pulled up around his neck. Another rested with his hand still touching the stock of his rifle. A third stared into the dark because a sound had come from somewhere beyond the hedge, and he could not decide whether to wake the others. The field around them was almost invisible. The day's mud had cooled. Their bodies needed mercy. The night gave them another question instead. What stays with me most is how lonely a soldier could be while lying only a few feet from other men, because each man had to listen to the darkness with his own fear. This kind of night changed the whole rhythm of the unit. Men did not wake refreshed. They woke because they were told to move, because a shell landed nearby, because someone shook their shoulder, or because fear had already lifted them out of sleep. The next day began on top of the last one. Orders came to men who had barely rested. Boots went back into mud before the feet inside them had stopped aching. Rifles were lifted by hands that had only loosened their grip for a few minutes. The army continued, but the men inside it became thinner in spirit. The larger truth is that Normandy after D-Day did not give soldiers clean breaks between danger and rest. Daylight forced them to see too many hedges, windows, lanes, and fields that might kill them. Night forced them to see almost nothing and to imagine the rest. The mind moved between overwork and uncertainty. The body moved between exhaustion and alarm. A man could survive the day, wait for darkness, and discover that darkness only changed the method of punishment. Night in Normandy did not end the war for the soldier. It only made the hedgerows darker, the sounds harder to trust, and sleep too thin to heal the body. Men rested with boots on, rifles close, and minds still listening for shells, patrols, or warning cries in the dark. By morning, some of the hardest suffering belonged to the wounded, because daylight did not always mean help could reach them. Wounded men in Normandy were not always carried away quickly. A soldier could be hit in a field beside a hedge, in a sunken lane, or near a crossroads, and the distance to help might look painfully small. His unit might be only a few yards away, a medic might be close enough to hear him, a stretcher might be somewhere behind the next bank. On paper, the army had aid stations, evacuation routes, ambulances, medical officers, and trained men who knew what to do. On the ground, the wounded man might still be lying in mud while the firing continued around him. That was the ordinary reason rescue became so difficult. The bocage did not make movement easy for anyone, including the people trying to save lives. Hedgerows blocked paths. Earth banks forced men through narrow gaps. Lanes could be shelled, mined, or blocked by vehicles. Stretchers were hard to carry across broken fields and through thick growth. Ambulances could not simply appear wherever they were needed. A wounded soldier might be close in distance, but very far in practical danger. Between him and help, there could be one exposed patch of ground, and that was enough. A man could lie where everyone knew he was and remain out of reach. His friends might see part of his body behind a hedge. They might hear him moving, breathing, or calling weakly, but the same machine gun, mortar or sniper that struck him might still be waiting. A rescuer who stood too soon could become another body in the same place. The men around him had to measure compassion against survival, and that was a cruel kind of arithmetic no one should have to learn. It is almost obscene that a battlefield can make helping a wounded man feel like a dangerous mistake, as if mercy itself had to crawl through mud under fire. The body of the wounded soldier suffered in slow layers. Pain came first, or shock came first, or sometimes a strange numbness that made him wonder how badly he had been hurt. Mud soaked into his clothing. Rain or damp grass touched his face. His hands might search the ground for something to hold. Blood could make his uniform heavy. His mouth dried. His breathing became work. The world narrowed to the hedge above him. The sound of fire nearby, the weight of his gear, and the terrible question of whether anyone could reach him before his strength ran down. Helplessness spread to everyone nearby. The wounded man could not move himself. The medic could not ignore him. The squad could not always reach him. The officer could not stop the enemy fire by wanting to. Other soldiers might look at the ground between them and him, knowing exactly what needed to be done and exactly why it could not be done yet. That delay could last minutes or longer, and every moment felt like a decision being made by the land, the enemy, and the limits of the human body. The lesson was plain. Medical organization matters, but it cannot erase the battlefield. A modern army can train medics, build aid stations, carry bandages, move ambulances, and plan evacuation routes, but terrain and fire can still interrupt every step. A wound is not only a medical problem, it is also a problem of distance, cover, roads, weather, timing, and enemy weapons. Normandy showed that a man could survive the first injury and still be placed in danger by the weight that followed. Modern people often imagine rescue as something that comes quickly once help is nearby. But in Normandy, help could be close enough to see and still too far away to touch. A sad scene could happen behind a hedgerow after a brief attack had failed. A wounded man lay partly in the grass, one leg twisted under him, his helmet fallen a few feet away. His platoon was on the near side of the field, pressed low against the bank. The medic had his bag ready. Everyone knew where the man was. No one had forgotten him. But the open strip between them was watched. Twice, someone shifted as if to go, and twice the firing snapped across the grass before he could rise. The wounded man was not abandoned. He was trapped in sight of those who wanted to save him. What stays with me most is the thought of men carrying guilt, not because they refused to help, but because the war made help wait beside them with its hands tied. This kind of suffering changed the men who witnessed it. They learned that being wounded did not always mean the worst was over. It might mean a new kind of fear, quieter and more lonely than the moment of impact. It might mean waiting while others argued with the ground, the fire, the road, and the clock. It might mean hearing men nearby but not feeling their hands yet. For the soldiers who could still move, it left a mark too. They had to continue fighting after seeing how hard it could be to retrieve one of their own. The larger truth is that Normandy, after D-Day, tested not only courage in attack, but courage in rescue. It tested the medic crawling forward, the stretcher-bearer choosing a route, the friend waiting for a second, and the wounded man trying to last until that second came. The battlefield did not care that medical systems had improved. It did not care that men wanted to save each other. It placed bodies behind hedges, in mud, and along roads under fire, then forced everyone nearby to discover how little kindness could do without cover. Wounded men in Normandy often suffered twice, first from the injury itself, and then from the weight imposed by hedges, mud, narrow roads, and enemy fire. Help could be close, organized, and desperate to reach them, yet still held back by one exposed strip of ground. The next pain was even harder to carry, because sometimes the most frightening sound was not the wound itself, but the voice of a man everyone knew they could not yet save. A wounded man's voice could change the whole shape of a field. Before that, the men around him might be thinking about the hedge, the next order, the road behind them, or the machine gun somewhere ahead. They might be pressed low in the grass, waiting for fire to ease, trying to make their bodies small enough to survive the next few seconds. Then a voice came from the open ground, weak or strained or frightened, and suddenly the field was not only a place of danger. It was a place where someone they knew was waiting for them to do what no one could safely do. That was the ordinary reason the moment became so hard to bear. So soldiers were trained to fight, move, take cover, obey orders, and keep the unit alive. They were also human beings who knew the sound of a man in pain. The wounded soldier might be a friend, a new replacement, a man whose name they had only learned that morning, or someone they had marched beside for days without saying much. It did not matter. Once he was lying there, visible or half hidden, the body wanted to go to him. The mind knew why it could not. The space between them could be very small. A few yards of grass, a gap in a hedge, a strip of road watched by a gun, a muddy patch between two banks. From a safe room in a peaceful life, it would look close enough to cross in seconds. In Normandy, that same little space could belong completely to the enemy. A man could start to crawl and be hit before reaching the first ditch. A medic could lift his head and become the next patient. A rescuer could turn one wounded man into two. It is almost unbearable that courage could be present in every man there, and still not be enough to move one body across a few yards of grass. The body reacted to this helplessness in ways no order could clean up. A soldier's hands tightened around his rifle until his fingers hurt. His chest pressed into the ground while his head tried not to lift. His throat dried because he wanted to call back, but knew sound could draw fire. His stomach twisted each time the wounded man moved or called again. The mud under him felt cold through his uniform. The field seemed too wide and too small at the same time. Too wide to cross safely, too small to excuse the waiting. The helplessness was not the same as cowardice. That mattered, even if it did not make the moment easier. A man who stayed down might be obeying an order. He might be protecting the rest of the squad. He might be waiting for smoke, covering fire, a shift in the enemy's aim, or a safer route through the hedge. He might be doing exactly what survival required. But the heart does not always accept military logic quietly. It remembers the voice. It remembers the distance. It remembers that someone was alive while help remained still. The lesson was plain and brutal. War not only asks men to risk their lives, it also asks them to decide when risking one life may cost several more. That is a colder burden than simple bravery. A heroic story can make rescue sound pure and immediate, but the real ground of Normandy did not always allow purity. Machine guns, mortars, mud, hedges, and orders could turn compassion into a calculation. A man could want to save another man, and still be forced to wait while that desire burned inside him. Modern people often think the right thing should be obvious in an emergency, but in Normandy, the right thing could be trapped between saving one man now and keeping 5 more from falling beside him. A sad scene could sit in a shallow field after an attack had stopped. The squad lay along a bank, faces dirty, helmets low, rifles pointed toward a hedge that kept its secrets. A wounded man was somewhere ahead, near a patch of flattened grass. His voice came and faded, not always clear, but clear enough. One soldier shifted his knees under him, ready to crawl. Another grabbed his sleeve and held him down without looking at him. The medic stared at the ground between them, bag close to his side, knowing every second mattered, and knowing every wrong second could kill him too. What stays with me most is that some men had to survive not only the people they lost, but the exact minutes when they knew those people were still alive and unreachable. This kind of moment could remain inside a unit long after the firing stopped. Men might not speak about it. They might move on when ordered, clean their weapons, dig in again, or eat something cold because the body still demanded food. But the memory stayed. It lived in the pause before someone answered a call for help. It lived in the way a man looked at a medic. It lived in the silence after a name was mentioned, and no one knew what to say. Normandy wounded not only the men who were hit, it wounded the men who had to watch court. The larger truth is that the campaign tested courage in ways that were not clean enough for monuments. It tested the courage to move forward, but also the courage to stay still when moving would only add another body. It tested loyalty, guilt, obedience, and the limits of friendship under fire. A soldier could do the correct thing and still feel punished by it. He could live through the day and carry the sound of another man into the next night. In Normandy, survival itself could come with witnesses that the mind did not know how to put down. The cry of a wounded man in Normandy could be less frightening than the moment everyone understood why help could not yet reach him. Mud, machine gun fire, orders and exposed ground could hold rescuers in place, while guilt grew heavier than the rifle in their hands. After so many days of waiting, crawling, fighting, and losing men by inches, the final breakout began to show what all that slow dying had been building toward. The final breakout in Normandy did not feel like a miracle to the men who had spent weeks being worn down in the bocage. It felt more like a door finally cracking after too many hands had pushed against it, too many bodies had fallen near it, and too many days had been spent wondering whether the front would ever move properly again. A soldier who had crawled through fields, waited under mortars, crossed lanes, and watched wounded men lie behind hedges did not see the breakout as a clean new beginning. He saw it as the result of everything that had already been paid. For weeks, the ordinary work of the campaign had been painfully small. Take a field, clear a hedge, reach a road, hold a village, bring up ammunition, pull back the wounded, move a tank forward, lose it in a lane, try the next morning again. The men might not have known the full shape of the plan, but they knew the feeling of being stuck. The front seemed to chew time. Days passed, and the map moved only a little. The army was advancing, but the soldier on the ground often felt as if Normandy was only changing the place where the next man would fall. The opening did not appear because the land suddenly became kind. It came because enough force was gathered against the German line. Enough artillery fired, enough aircraft struck, enough infantry pushed forward, and enough tanks pressed through weak places. What had looked like endless hedgerows and stubborn roads began, in places, to break. The soldier could feel the change in movement before he could explain it. Orders came faster. Vehicles pushed harder. Men who had spent weeks measuring progress by yards began hearing about roads opening and units moving beyond the old choke points. It is almost cruel that a breakthrough can look sudden from far away, when the men who made it possible know it was built from weeks of mud, fear, wounds and graves. The body did not forget those weeks just because the front began to move. A soldier entering the breakout was still tired, his feet still hurt, his clothes still held dirt and sweat, his shoulders still remembered the straps, his eyes still watched hedges even when the road ahead seemed more open than before. He might walk faster, but his body carried the old caution. He had learned too much to trust movement simply because it was movement. After so long in the bocage, even progress could feel suspicious. Helplessness changed its form too. Before the soldier had felt trapped by hedges, lanes, and hidden fire. Now he could feel pulled forward by the speed of the advance. The same army that had been crawling suddenly needed to exploit the opening before it closed. Men had to keep moving because a delay could waste everything already spent. A soldier might want to rest more or understand what had happened, but the campaign did not pause for that. The gap had opened, and living men were expected to pass through it. The lesson was plain. A breakthrough is not only a moment of motion, it is the visible result of hidden exhaustion. Before the line breaks, men have already tested it again and again with their bodies. Units have already been thinned. Roads have already been blocked and cleared. Villages have already been ruined. Wounded men have already waited in mud. The sudden movement at the end can make the earlier days look like preparation, but for the men inside those days, preparation had felt like dying slowly. Modern people often see a military breakout as arrows moving freely across a map, but the soldier inside it knew every arrow had a trail of men behind it who were no longer moving at all. A sad scene could happen as vehicles finally began to push through a road that had been fought over for days. A soldier passed a hedge where his unit had once been pinned for hours. The grass was flattened. A broken rifle still lay near the bank. A burned vehicle sat partly in the ditch, now only an obstacle to be passed around. Men moved beyond it at last, but nobody cheered there. One man glanced toward the place where someone had been hit earlier and then looked away. The front was opening, but the ground behind them was full of reasons not to feel light. What stays with me most is how victory can arrive too late to comfort the people who paid the first and heaviest part of its price. This was the social cost of the breakout. Units that had been drained by weeks in the bocage were now asked to move through the opening created by their own losses. New men had replaced old men, platoons had changed shape, officers had disappeared, friendships had been cut off before they had time to become memories anyone wanted to touch. The army could count the breakout as a success, and it was a success, but the men on the ground knew that success had not repaired the empty spaces in the line. The larger truth is that Normandy, after D-Day, did not move from failure to victory in one clean turn. It moved from slow killing to faster movement. The breakout mattered because it finally loosened the German hold and opened the way beyond the bocage, but it did not erase the fields, roads, villages, and nights that came before it. Sometimes a campaign spends men for weeks so that one narrow chance can appear. Then, when the chance appears, the living have to step through it, carrying the dead with them in silence. The breakout in Normandy showed that weeks of slow suffering had not been meaningless, but that did not make them less costly. Every road that opened had been prepared by exhausted units, broken vehicles, wounded men, and soldiers who never reached the moving front. Once the German line began to crack, the war did not become gentle, because the roads ahead would soon fill with a different kind of destruction as a retreating army was trapped and torn apart. The Falaise pocket showed what happened when the German front in Normandy finally began to break. For weeks, the fighting had been hedges, lanes, villages, mines, mortars, and slow movement through country that seemed to resist every step. German units had used the bocage to delay, wound, and exhaust the Allies. They had made fields expensive and roads dangerous, but when the breakout widened and pressure came from several directions, the war changed again. The men who had once hidden behind hedges and stone walls now had to move, and movement under Allied fire became its own kind of disaster. That was the ordinary reason the retreat became so terrible. An army does not disappear neatly when a front collapses. It has vehicles, horses, guns, supply carts, wounded men, tired infantry, officers trying to keep order, and roads too narrow for panic. Everyone needs to move at once, and not everyone can. Some want to retreat, some are ordered to hold, some do not know where the open road still is. A column can begin as a military movement and turn into a mass of engines, hooves, broken wagons, wounded bodies, abandoned equipment, and men walking because there is nothing left to ride. In the Falaise area, that crowding became deadly. Roads filled with German vehicles, horse-drawn transport, artillery, infantry, medical wagons, and men trying to escape before the pocket closed. Allied aircraft and artillery struck the routes where movement gathered. A road that had once promised escape became a place where wreckage blocked the living behind the dead. A vehicle hit at the front could stop everything after it. A horse team could panic. A gun could be abandoned in the ditch. A wounded man could be left because the column had to keep moving or be destroyed where it stood. It is almost grimly fitting that the same army which had made every Allied yard cost blood now found its own escape routes, charging the same price back with interest. The body of a retreating soldier suffered differently from the body of a defender. He was no longer pressed into a hedge waiting for the enemy to come closer. He was exposed in movement, tired, hungry, sleepless, and often unsure whether the next turn in the road was escape or another trap. His feet hurt from marching through dust and mud. His throat dried from smoke and fear. His hands carried a weapon that might feel useless against aircraft overhead, or shells landing into a busy road. Every halt felt dangerous. Every movement felt too slow. Helplessness came from the collapse of order. A soldier could still have a uniform, a rifle, and a unit, but the larger shape around him was failing. Orders could be confused. Roads could be blocked. Officers could vanish in smoke. Vehicles could run out of fuel. Wounded men could be too heavy to move. Men could see the road ahead burning and still have no better road to take. The retreat was not only fear of death, it was the fear of being inside a machine that had stopped obeying itself. The lesson was plain. A defeated army can be most vulnerable when it is forced to move through limited routes under pressure. Defending in Bocage had given German soldiers concealment and control. Retreating through Falaise took much of that away. Movement gathered targets. Roads concentrated men and machines. Allied air power and artillery punished places where the columns could not spread out. The battlefield that had once hidden danger behind hedges now exposed retreating bodies and vehicles in lines that could be struck again and again. Modern people often imagine retreat as simply moving away from danger, but at Falaise, retreat could mean being trapped on the very road everyone else was also trying to use. A sad scene could sit on one of those roads after an attack. A German truck burned near a ditch. A horse lay still in its harness. A field gun stood abandoned at an angle, its wheels half sunk in churned earth. Men moved around the wreckage with faces emptied by exhaustion, some still carrying rifles, some helping wounded comrades, some only looking for a gap where the column might move again. Behind them, more men pressed forward. Ahead of them, smoke and broken vehicles made the road look less like a route out and more like a corridor closing from both ends. What stays with me most is how quickly the roles could change. From hidden defenders making others pay for every field to exhausted men being crushed on roads they needed in order to survive. This widened the meaning of Normandy's killing. The campaign was not only the story of Allied soldiers suffering after the beaches, it was also the story of German soldiers being pulled into destruction when the defensive system finally failed. Some had fought from hedges and villages. Some had arrived too late to change anything. Some were wounded, hungry, trapped, or too tired to understand the full collapse around them. They were part of an army that had occupied and defended, but they were also human bodies caught in the brutal end of a losing position. The larger truth is that Normandy after D-Day became a machine that ground both sides in different ways. The Allies paid for the advance through hedges, mines, mortars, villages, mud, and sleepless nights. The Germans paid when delay turned into entrapment, when roads filled faster than they could empty, and when firepower found them in retreat. The real killing did not belong to one famous morning on the beach. It spread across weeks, across fields, across roads, and finally into the pocket where an army trying to escape was torn apart by the same campaign it had tried to stop. Falaise showed that Normandy's destruction did not end when the German line began to crack. It only changed direction. Roads of retreat became crowded with vehicles, horses, guns, wounded men, and infantry under Allied fire, turning escape into another form of slaughter. After this, the final lesson was impossible to avoid, because Normandy proved that war often becomes most terrible after the famous moment people think they already understand. Normandy after D-Day reminds us that war does not always end where memory likes to stop. The beach became the famous image, the place people could name, picture, and understand from a distance. Landing craft, surf, sand obstacles, smoke, and men running toward the shore became the symbol of the whole campaign. But for the soldier who survived that morning, the story did not close when his boots left the beach. It opened into fields, hedges, mud, villages, narrow roads, sleepless nights, and many smaller places where death did not need a famous name. That is the ordinary reason this story matters. People remember the dramatic door, but not always the rooms behind it. D-Day was the door into France, but Normandy still had to be crossed by human bodies. The invasion had to become a front. The front had to become movement. Movement had to pass through bocage, stone farms, sunken lanes, mined roads, ruined towns, and places where Germans waited from cover. A soldier might have survived the most famous day of his life, only to find that the days after it asked for the same courage in smaller, dirtier, more exhausting pieces. The real cost appeared after the symbol. Infantrymen were pushed into hedgerows that hid guns only a few yards away. Tanks that looked powerful on paper became blind in narrow lanes. Trucks and wounded men were trapped on roads too small for the burden placed on them. Villages that had once held ordinary families became small fortresses. Civilians waited between occupation and liberation, sometimes losing their homes to the same firepower that helped free them. Wounded soldiers lay in mud while help waited nearby, unable to cross one strip of watched ground. It is almost dishonest how history can make one day glow so brightly that the suffering after it disappears into the shadow behind the picture. The body of the Normandy soldier carried the truth better than any monument could. His feet remembered the mud, his shoulders remembered the weight of wet gear. His eyes remembered hedges that looked empty until they were not. His hands remembered holding a rifle while listening to a wounded man call from a place no one could safely reach. His sleep was shallow. His clothes stayed dirty. His nerves learned to fear quiet fields, dark windows, road bends, orchards, and the strange silence before mortar fire. He did not live inside a clean legend. He lived inside the repeated work of staying alive, one dangerous place at a time. Helplessness ran through the whole campaign. The Allied soldier could believe in the cause and still be unable to save a friend in the open. He could come as a liberator and still walk past homes his own side shells had damaged. He could see why heavy firepower was needed and still feel the human cost of it. The German soldier could delay the advance for weeks, then find himself trapped in retreat when the front finally cracked. The civilian could hope for freedom and still lose the room where the family had eaten, slept, and waited through the occupation. Normandy did not give anyone a simple place to stand. The lesson is plain. War is not only the famous event that appears in schoolbooks and films, it is also the continuation afterward, when men who are already tired must keep going, because the larger machine has not finished with them. It is the road after the landing, the field after the speech, the village after the map arrow, the wounded man after the attack, the family after the bombardment, the quiet morning after a night without sleep. Normandy shows that history's most famous moments are often not endings. They are openings into suffering that lasts longer and spreads wider than the image people remember. Modern people often understand war through a handful of powerful scenes, but the men in Normandy understood it through repetition, through another hedge, another road, another field, another ruined house, and another name missing from the line. A sad scene could gather the whole campaign into one quiet moment. Imagine a soldier standing near the edge of a road weeks after the landing. Behind him are beaches he no longer thinks of as the end of fear. Around him are hedges broken by tanks, fields marked by shell holes, a village with walls open to the air, and a road where vehicles once waited in smoke. He is still alive, but he is not the same man who stepped off the sand. Somewhere behind him are men who never left the first fields. Somewhere ahead are roads that still demand more. He has helped win ground, but the ground does not feel clean. What stays with me most is the thought that some soldiers survived D-Day, only to learn that survival was not rescue. It was permission to keep walking into the rest of Normandy. This is the human weight of the story. Normandy, after D-Day, when the real killing began, is not only about strategy, terrain, or military pressure. It is about how a campaign turns ordinary land into a place of repeated danger. It is about how a small field can feel endless when a hidden gun watches it. It is about how a road can decide whether ammunition arrives or a wounded man lives. It is about how a village can be liberated and broken on the same day. It is about how both sides can be ground down inside a region that was never built to carry so much fear. The larger truth is that war often becomes most terrible after the moment everyone thinks they already understand. The landing was only the beginning of the price. The weeks after it showed what it really meant to turn a foothold into a victory on land. There was no clean path from the beach to freedom. There was only a hard passage through mud, hedges, houses, roads, smoke, exhaustion, and memory. Normandy teaches that the most famous day is not always the whole story. Sometimes it is only the first page people remember, while the pages after it are darker, slower, and filled with those who had no choice but to keep moving. Normandy after D-Day shows that war does not end at its most famous moment, because the true cost often begins after the image has already been fixed in memory. The soldiers, civilians, wounded men, tank crews, replacements, and retreating enemies all became part of a long, grinding aftermath that turned victory into something heavy and human. And as we leave those hedgerows, broken roads, ruined villages, and quiet fields behind for tonight, remember the men who kept walking after the beach, sleep peacefully, and good night.